Hello everyone, my name is Marian Guevara, and today I'll be discussing my most disappointing books of 2025. I actually really like filming this type of video because as much as I like explaining what I really enjoy about books, I also enjoy talking about what doesn't work for me in a book. And of course, certain caveats, little disclaimers whenever it comes to these type of videos. If you actually enjoy these books, that's completely valid. Just because it didn't work out for me doesn't mean that it is an objectively bad book. By all means, if you are interested in checking out any of them, I highly recommend that you do so if it sounds like something you'll enjoy. What works for me may not work for you, and what works for you may not work out for me. So, doesn't really matter. It's subjective. I just do want to talk about just why these books in particular did not meet my expectations and were ultimately disappointments. So, yeah. Without further ado, let's just get started. So the first book in this video is Uncle Silas by Sheridan Le Fanu. So this is a Victorian novel that I was very excited to get to. For one, it's gothic, and two, it's been described as an early psychological thriller. This one follows a young woman whose father unexpectedly passes away, and so she goes into the care of her Uncle Silas. And she discovers that her uncle and this sort of nefarious governess have unsavory plans for her and her future. So that's all I'm going to say about it. Now, unfortunately, my disappointment with this book mainly stems from the character of Uncle Silas. When Le Fanu is describing him in the beginning, he does so with a lot of dark, supernatural connotations, to a point where I was honestly expecting this book to take a certain turn and end more akin to something like M.R. James or Algernon Blackwood, kind of play along with that kind of supernatural theming. Unfortunately, it did not do so, and I found the ending to be ultimately underwhelming for what the build-up was. And because the ending was underwhelming, it became at least more obvious to me how slow this book was. I mean, I read Victorian novels all the time. You know, I'm fine with a slow pace, but I do feel that Uncle Silas could have been shortened. It doesn't have the tight pacing of like maybe a Wilkie Collins or even a Thomas Hardy, you know? I mean, especially Wilkie Collins, who has like already chunky books, but it never feels like to me that his plots are meandering. Towards the middle of this book, the plot does meander a bit. And honestly, if it wasn't for the introduction of a particular character who I liked, yeah, I would have found myself more annoyed with the pacing of this book. So unfortunately, the problem does lie with certain expectations that I had and just weren't met, not only for the character of Uncle Silas, but this book as a whole. For the second disappointment of 2025, we have City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the first book within the popular Daevabad trilogy. So this one, we're following a young woman who is a con artist living in, I forget, it's either 18th or 19th century Cairo. And she ends up getting sucked into this fantasy world of Jinn, a world that she might actually have a connection to due to her past. Now, that's all I gotta say about it. And I will say that I'm not going to be moving on with the Daevabad trilogy. Someone did recommend this book to me for my reading challenge this year, a challenge that I failed, by the way. However, I was interested in trying it out beforehand because mainly due to the world building. This is a fantasy world that is inspired by Middle Eastern culture, so that is what intrigued me. And I will say this, I do feel that the best aspect of this book is the world building. You can really tell that Chakraborty put a lot of research and work into crafting this world, all the political factions, the culture, all the minutiae that goes into it. That being said, I do think that many times this world building is delivered in a clunky way, to a point where I was kind of going back and forth, going, what is this? However, the major problem that I have with this book is the fact that I don't care about any of the characters. I don't even remember the name of our main protagonist. That's how much I've put this book out of my mind. I know we follow her perspective and then another character's, I believe his name is Ali. And out of the two of them, I think Ali's was the more interesting for me. Not for him, but for the moral and ethical dilemma that he found himself in. I also saw the inklings, the beginnings of a love triangle, which I was not a fan of. I mean, love triangles aren't bad or anything. They can be done very well, but I'd rather have them not in my book. But yeah, the major problem is the fact that by the end of the story, I was not interested in knowing what happens to any of these characters in the second book. So unfortunately, this was a disappointment, and I will not be moving on with the David Bode trilogy. For the next disappointment of 2025, we have Remarkably Bright Creatures. I'm going to be frank with you. Upon finishing this book, my knee-jerk reaction was, why is this so popular? Why does this have several special editions? Why is this becoming a Netflix film? However, upon mulling it over, I guess I could see why. I suppose it does have this very feel-good sort of general appeal for audiences. Honestly, the only thing to me that stood out about this book was the fact that an octopus occasionally narrates. We're following an elderly protagonist as she's reflecting back on her past, on her present, and this is very much a book that focuses on grief and loss, and it does explore these themes, with sincerity, with seriousness. And, however, it does so without losing its cozy feeling, its lightheartedness. By all means, this is not a bad book. It's just that I was expecting more. I did not feel as emotionally impacted as I thought I would when I first started this book. Moving on to the next disappointment, we have The Silent Companions by Laura Parcell. Now, I did not realize that I actually put this book on my want to read list on Goodreads years ago. It was only recently that I rediscovered this book. But I picked this one up because, one, it's gothic, it's historical fiction, and people described it as being unsettling, disturbing, and it got under their skin. And the plot intrigued me. So this takes place in the 19th century. Well, you're following various different perspectives, but the main, I guess you could say, perspective takes place in the 19th century. We're following a young woman named Elsie who recently got married. She's currently pregnant, and she's also a widow now because her husband died in an accident. And she's traveling to her husband's estate where she's going to be the mistress. And while she's there, she's kind of dealing with feelings of being an outsider. She stumbles upon a room, a locked room, and inside is what is known as it's basically, a silent companion, but it's like this wooden effigy, wooden companion that strangely looks like her. And that was enough for me to, check this book out. And I had several problems with it. For one thing, this is subjective, but I just did not find it scary. And to be fair, people did say, it's not really scary, but it's unsettling, it's disturbing, and I can work with that. There was one scene that was a bit tense, where it's basically a chase in the dark. But other than that, it just didn't scare me. And I understand that is subjective. Someone else could read this and be very creeped out, but that just wasn't my case. Another major problem that I had was the anachronism. So there's two main perspectives, one in the 19th century, one in the 17th or 18th century. And the voices of these perspectives didn't feel like they belong in their respective timelines. In fact, the 17th century voice and the 19th century voice sounded similar. And honestly, when I'm dealing with historical fiction, anachronism is just something that takes me out of the narrative, and it also does annoy me a bit. There were also clues or hints that the author kind of leaves that to me were kind of like blaring red flags, to a point where I saw certain things coming. And the ending, in my opinion, felt abrupt, felt rushed. And I was just reading this book and waiting to be surprised. I was waiting to be caught off guard, and it just didn't happen. So this was ultimately a disappointment. Now, for the last two disappointing reads of 2025, I actually still have physical copies of them. I'm typically good at unhauling books that I find to be just okay or meh. So if any of you are interested in these two, feel free to contact me at my Instagram down below. So the first one here is Confessions by Kane Manato. This one I've been meaning to get to for quite a bit. The premise is that we're following an elementary school teacher on her last day. She's about to retire, and tragically, before this, her 4-year-old daughter died in an accident. However, she discovers that it wasn't an accident. In fact, she was killed by 2 of her students. So she decides to confront them and then enact some revenge. Now, I guess this could be a bit of a spoiler warning. However, I initially thought that this entire book was going to be built up to that confrontation and to that revenge. However, that's only in the first section. The subsequent sections are the aftermath, the consequences of her revenge. And after I finished that first section, I was kind of caught off guard, and I thought to myself, whoa, If the rest of the book is going to be like that, I think this might be a favorite. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The book lost steam for me in the middle part. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like the strongest portions was the beginning and the end. The middle wasn't bad at all. We're mainly following the two kids responsible, seeing what happens to them, and there's just a lot of explanations. This is why I did it, this is how I did it, and it's relayed in a very matter-of-fact way. There's no room for any like dark ambiguity to kind of chew on. So it was just fine until we got to the very ending where you kind of got that last twist. But yeah, not a bad book by any means. I'm glad I read it. However, I'm not going to reread this book ever again. So yeah, that was Confessions. We have now arrived to the last book, and it's actually my most recent read. I just finished it a day ago, and that is Mallory by Josh Malerman. This is the sequel to Bird Box, which I also recently read. It's right here. I have this nice Harper Olive Perennial Edition, so I will definitely be keeping this one. Mallory, on the other hand, can leave. I do prefer Bird Box, but I am glad to have picked up Mallory. I was intrigued. I was invested in knowing what happened to the characters at the end of Bird Box. See the continuation of their story. Now, this is a sequel, so my thoughts, I'm going to have to keep it general. I will have like a spoilery section, I'll tell you, and I also will have timestamps down below. So generally speaking, I did like the beats of the story. I like the motive behind, Mallory wanting to leave her current home with her children and risk a journey up north. Okay, I liked it. I liked how the book ended. The journey, it was going fine in the beginning, but I did have a problem with the third section of this book. I found it to be incredibly rushed, very rushed, and filled with just so many conveniences, coincidences. It was just like one convenience after another to get to the ending. So that's all I can say, like, for non-spoilery. So spoilery section here. So I'm going to be going into grave detail. But yeah, spoilers. Once we got to Indian River, it almost became ridiculous in a way. How convenient is it that Tom is the one to create the glasses that can allow people to see the creatures? How convenient is it that Olympia is able to see the creatures without any repercussions? How convenient that, Mallory's dad is in the exact same town. Not the town that they were heading to, but the town that they ended up in at the very end. Like, it honestly felt to me that Malerman was told, okay, wrap it up right now. It just felt everything kind of just was forced into place at the end. And yeah, it just didn't feel organic or natural. Also, can I just say, I feel like Gary's presence was just one huge plot hole in this book. I mean, Malerman confirms that he's basically been stalking Mallory and the kids all this time. Okay, so when did it start? Was he following them all the way to, up the river to the School of the Blind? Okay, if so, was he coincidentally there? Was he coincidentally there when everything hit the fan and he saw them leave and go to Camp Yadin? Or did he just stumble upon them by accident at Camp Yadin? Like, which one is it? Because I feel that both of those scenarios are just unlikely. Also, you cannot get me to believe, you cannot make me suspend my disbelief in thinking that in those 10 years in Camp Yadin, he's been going in and out, sleeping over, completely undetected by Mallory and the kids. I'm sorry, like, I cannot believe that. You're telling me not once in a decade, Tom and Olympia, who are confirmed, who are established to have like super bionic hearing, did not once catch him coming in and out of the camp. Not once. I'm sorry, it's just so unbelievable. Okay? Gary is a manipulator, but he's a pudgy old man. He's not Solid Snake. He's not going to be sneaking around. And honestly, just the fact that he's been stalking Mallory and the kids for this long, I just find to be not believable. In the first book, Gary felt more like a plague. Like he goes to one group of people, kind of manipulates them, gets them to, you know, test out his theory. Everything goes to hell. He shrugs it off, and then he moves on to the next group of people to ruin them. That's basically it. That's basically how I viewed Gary. I just don't buy him being invested in this one woman and her 2 kids for all these years. For like 16 years, I'm sorry. No, like, I just don't buy it. It just doesn't feel believable. Also, okay, Mallerman has established that Mallory has been right, that Gary has been the boogeyman for her and the kids all these years. So you would think that their confrontation would be more meaningful, but no, it's basically kind of just hand-waved, you know? She shoots him from afar, and that's basically it. They don't exchange any words, nothing. She even says, like, in the end, he didn't have much to say. Well, yeah, because he was sleeping, and you shot him in his sleep. That's why he didn't say anything. Another problem that I did have was that one of the major aspects of this book was family drama. The tension between Mallory and her son, Tom, and their 2 conflicting worldviews. Tom wants to, you know, he's for progress. He wants to learn more about these creatures, find a way to, you know, fight against them. And Mallory, because she's so traumatized by what's happened both in Bird Box and in the beginning of this book, is just so hell-bent on survival, focusing on just keeping her kids alive and close to her. So there's obviously friction between the 2 of them. And I just felt it was not properly addressed at the end. Like, there's no final, you know, exchange of words or views. It's kind of just, you know, hand-waved over. The first book, it was shorter, it was tighter, but I felt that it was, you know, better paced, at least compared to Mallory. I feel like this one started off good, but just felt really rushed towards that end. So yeah. So those were my most disappointing books of 2025. I hope you guys enjoyed. I actually enjoyed filming this video. It always feels cathartic to talk about some disappointing reads, just explain, verbalize why a story just didn't work out for me. So yeah, please let me know down below in the comments what were your most disappointing reads of 2025. You can expect my favorite books of 2025 video. I don't know exactly when, but obviously in the future. So yes, thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!